The missile hit runway 27 without warning. Emily Carter felt the shockwave before she heard the explosion. Concrete fragments screamed past the shattered control tower window. Below, 400 civilians scattered across the tarmac, mothers dragging children between the carcasses of abandoned aircraft, men stumbling through rolling black smoke. She didn't shoot. She counted. 3 men moving wrong, too calm, too deliberate, guiding the crowd, not running with it. Her scope drifted right. The sandstorm was building on the eastern horizon, a brown wall swallowing the desert whole. The Israeli drone feed flickered once, then flatlined. Static swallowed the radio. Then Old Wolf's voice cut through, low, careful. Kid, a pause. Another sniper just found your nest. The wind came first. It always did out here. It moved through the shattered terminal windows like something alive, low and patient, dragging fine desert grit across cracked tile floors, across overturned check-in counters, across the faded departure boards that still read flights no one would ever catch. Riyadh, Amman, Istanbul. The letters had stopped flipping 3 years ago when the last commercial flight out of Al-Qaim Regional Airport lifted off with its cargo hold stuffed with whatever the airport manager could carry. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter lay flat on the collapsed second floor of the control tower, her cheek pressed against the stock of her M110A1. The suppressor was already threaded. The scope caps were off. She had been in position for 40 minutes before dawn cracked the horizon, and she had not moved once since. Below her, the airfield stretched in every direction. It had been a mid-sized regional airport once. 2 runways, a modest terminal, a cluster of maintenance hangars on the western edge. Now it was something else. The northern terminal building had lost its roof to a rocket strike 18 months ago, and the steel skeleton jutted against the sky like the ribs of something long dead. 3 commercial airliners sat frozen on the tarmac, an old 737, a regional turboprop, and a wide-body jet with its nose gear collapsed, the aircraft resting on its chin at a defeated angle. None of them were going anywhere. What the airport had become was a shelter. 411 civilians. That was the number from last night's count. Families from 4 different villages caught between the militia advance from the east and the closed border crossing to the north. They had flooded the airport over the past 6 days, filling the hangars with bedrolls and cook fires, stringing laundry lines between the aircraft landing gear, turning the cargo terminal into a medical ward. Children ran across the runway at dusk when the heat broke. Old men sat in rings near the terminal doors, watching the desert for dust clouds. Emily watched all of it through her scope. She had learned this from Old Wolf years ago, back when she was a young specialist who thought sniper work was about the shot. The shot is the last 5%, he had told her. The other 95 is watching, learning, understanding what normal looks like so you recognize the moment it changes. She understood it now. She swept the scope slowly left to right. Families clustered near the hangar doors. A woman nursing an infant in the shadow of the collapsed 737's wing. 2 teenage boys kicking a deflated soccer ball near the fuel depot fence. A group of men sharing tea near the terminal's eastern entrance. She noted their positions. She noted their posture. She noted the ones who didn't quite fit. For now, she filed it away. Let it sit in the back of her mind where she kept the things that weren't yet problems. The sun crept above the eastern ridge. The desert went from gray to amber to white in the span of 20 minutes. The heat began immediately, rising off the concrete in visible waves. By midday, the tarmac would be hot enough to raise blisters through boot leather. Emily took a slow breath, let it out. She had 3 days to hold this airport. She started counting. The briefing had happened 36 hours ago in a reinforced basement room beneath a U.S. forward operating base 40 miles west. Emily had stood at the back of the room with her arms crossed, listening to a lieutenant colonel named Hargrove walk through the slide deck with the practiced efficiency of a man who had given this exact briefing 4 times already that week. The situation was straightforward in the way that only military briefings made complicated things sound straightforward. Al-Qaim Regional Airport sat at the intersection of 3 competing interests. To the east, an Iran-backed militia network called Kataib al-Rayat had been pushing west for 6 weeks, consolidating territory along an old highway corridor that ran from the Syrian border down toward the Euphrates. To the north, a joint U.S.-Israeli task force was operating under a classified mandate to interdict weapons shipments moving through that same corridor. And caught in the middle, on an airfield that happened to sit directly astride the militia's intended route of advance, were 411 civilians with nowhere else to go. The mission was to hold the perimeter until an evacuation convoy could reach the airport from the west. 72 hours. Rules of engagement are restrictive, Hargrove had said, clicking to a new slide. Positive identification required before any engagement. Civilians are present in force. We cannot afford an incident. Emily had said nothing. She knew what restrictive ROE meant in practical terms. It meant she would have her finger on the trigger and her eye in the scope, and she would have to make decisions in fractions of seconds that lawyers would spend months reviewing afterward. One more item, Hargrove had added, almost as an afterthought, clicking to the final slide. Israeli liaison aircraft inbound at some point during the operational window. Exact ETA is unconfirmed. They're coordinating evacuation of several priority personnel embedded with the civilian population. Code name for the package is Elijah. When you hear that word on comms, be aware the aircraft is close. He had moved on before Emily could ask a follow-up question. Old Wolf had been sitting in the corner of the room during the entire briefing, his chair tilted back against the wall, his weathered hands folded over his stomach. He was the only civilian in the room and the only person who hadn't written anything down. When the lights came up, he had caught Emily's eye across the room and given her a look she had learned to read over 3 years of working alongside him. More to this than they're telling us. She had nodded once. She was thinking the same thing. Now, lying in the ruins of the control tower, 40 miles east of that basement room, she replayed the briefing in fragments. The corridor, the militia, the civilians, the Israeli aircraft, Elijah, coming at some unknown hour. 72 hours. She had 31 left. By 0900, the airport was fully awake. Emily had been watching long enough to understand the rhythms of the civilian population. Mornings were for water collection, long lines at the 2 functioning standpipes near the maintenance hangar. Mid-mornings were loud, children everywhere, the smell of flatbread cooking over propane burners drifting up even to her position in the tower. The men rotated between the cook fires and the shade of the terminal walls in loose groups, killing time the way people kill time when they have no information and no control. Patterns. Emily lived by them, which was why the 3 men near the eastern cargo terminal bothered her. They had arrived with a civilian group 2 days ago. She had the intake log from the small U.S. recon element on the ground. 4 soldiers under a staff sergeant named Okafor, who were the only other American military presence at the airport. The 3 men had checked in, been searched, been assigned space in Hangar 2, standard intake. But their pattern was wrong. They did not sleep on the same schedule as the people around them. They woke before dawn and moved in slow circuits around the eastern perimeter. Not pacing, not restless, but measuring. Emily had watched one of them stop at the corner of the cargo terminal, stand still for 30 seconds, then move exactly 15 paces before stopping again. He was doing it by feel, counting distance. She keyed her radio. "Wolf, you seeing the 3 near cargo east?" Old Wolf's voice came back immediately, calm as always. He was positioned in a hardened observation post near the Western Fuel Depot, providing overwatch on the approach roads. I see them. Been watching since 0630. The one in the gray dish Dasha is counting pace. Yep, that's not refugee behavior. No, Old Wolf said. It's not. She swept the scope wider. Near the northern hangar, 2 supply trucks had arrived before midnight. She had noted them in her log, flagged them for Okafor's team to inspect. But the inspection had been cursory. The trucks had been waved through. Emily had watched from the tower as the cargo, wooden crates stenciled with red crescent markings, was unloaded and moved to the rear of Hangar 3 without being opened. The supply trucks from last night, she said. Those crates weren't inspected. I know. Who cleared them? A pause. That's a good question, kid. Emily pulled back from the scope for a moment, blinking against the white glare of the desert morning. She pressed her knuckle against her lower lip, thinking. Then she heard it. A single, suppressed shot. Far away, northeast, from the direction of the empty scrubland beyond the runway perimeter. The sound was barely audible over the wind, a flat, compressed crack that someone without her training would have mistaken for a vehicle backfire. She was back in the scope instantly, swept northeast. Nothing. No movement, no dust, no target. Whoever fired had shot into empty ground. She felt the hair on her forearms rise. Calibrating, she thought, in the morning wind before the heat shimmer starts. Getting their dope dialed in. She said nothing to Old Wolf about it yet. She filed it in the back of her mind, next to the 3 men near Cargo East and the uninspected crates. The picture wasn't complete, but pieces were starting to find each other. The storm announced itself at 1340. Emily had been watching the eastern horizon since noon, tracking the brown smear along the ridgeline as it thickened and rose. By 1300, it was a wall. By 1330, it was moving faster than the weather app on Okafor's tablet had predicted. By 1340, the first gust hit the control tower with enough force to rattle the remaining window frames in their tracks. She pulled her rifle back from the edge and low-crawled to the interior wall. The sandstorm would eat her optics alive if she wasn't careful. She'd learned that the hard way during a 3-day overwatch in Mosul 4 years ago, watching her scope degrade to a useless blur by hour 2 of a blow. She covered the scope with a lens cap, pulled her shamag up over her nose and mouth, and pressed herself against the concrete. The world outside went brown. Within 4 minutes, visibility at ground level was under 20 meters. The civilians below had retreated to the hangars and terminal, the airport grounds suddenly empty of human movement. The wind screamed through the broken tower structure, a high, oscillating howl that changed pitch every time it found a new gap to funnel through. Emily's radio crackled. Drone feed is down, Old Wolf said. Lost the Israeli UAV at 1442. Storm interference. Copy. We're blind on the eastern approach. And the northern. The recon camera on the fence line just went to static. Emily exhaled slowly. Losing drone coverage during a militia threat wasn't just inconvenient. It was the kind of gap that tactically minded people waited for. She thought of the calibration shot from the northeast. Whoever had fired it this morning had fired it early, before the storm, before the heat shimmer, getting their numbers locked in while conditions were still clean, because they knew the storm was coming, because they planned to move during it. Okafor, she called on the ground frequency. I need your team on full alert. All 4 positions. Nobody moves cargo, nobody opens gates, and nobody clears vehicles without my authorization. Acknowledge. Copy that, Sergeant Carter. Okafor's voice was tight. He was a good soldier. He understood the shift in tone without needing it explained. She pulled out her notepad, the physical one she always carried, waterproof pages, and reviewed what she had. 3 men with wrong patterns near Cargo East, uninspected crates in Hangar 3, a calibration shot from the northeast at 0900, and now a sandstorm eating their surveillance network. She thought about the shape moving through thermal the night before, low to the ground, not refugee-shaped, not militia-shaped either in the ordinary sense, Something more disciplined than that. The wind hammered the tower again. Somewhere below, a piece of sheet metal tore free from the terminal roof and cartwheeled across the tarmac with a sound like a gunshot. Emily didn't flinch. She was already running calculations. Whoever was out there in the brown, measuring the distance to her tower, they were good, possibly very good. She needed to be better. The attack came at 16:17. The sandstorm had eased to a gritty haze, visibility back to roughly 200 meters, the air still thick with suspended particles that gave the afternoon light a sickly, amber quality. Emily was back at the scope, scanning the cargo hangar approach road, when the first RPG round arced out of the scrubland east of the perimeter fence and struck the corner of Hangar 2. The explosion was close enough to rattle the tower. Then the shooting started. She picked up movement immediately. 4, 6, 8 figures emerging from the scrubland, using the lingering dust haze as cover, spreading in a practiced assault line toward the eastern perimeter fence. They moved well, not militia stumbling forward in a mob. Spaced correctly, bounding, covering each other. "Contact east," she called. 8+ fighters, moving on the hangar perimeter. "I'm engaging." She didn't wait for acknowledgement. The first shot broke at 16:17:43. The lead fighter dropped at 260 meters. She was already cycling to the second. The suppressor kept her signature down. The fighters hesitated, scanning for the source, their assault line momentarily stalling. Okafor's team opened up from their positions near the fuel depot. The combined fire caught the attack from 2 angles. 3 more fighters went down in rapid succession. The remaining 4 broke and ran back toward the scrubland. Total engagement, 90 seconds. Emily swept the kill zone methodically, checking for secondary movement. Clean. She shifted the scope back to the approach road. Nothing inbound yet. She exhaled, rolled her neck once against the tension, and keyed her radio. "Wolf, what did you see from your angle?" "Timing and dispersion," Old Wolf said immediately. "That wasn't a militia probe. Those were trained fighters running a textbook breach approach." "I noticed. They also stopped the moment you dropped the first one. Militia doesn't do that. Militia keeps going until enough of them are dead." "Someone called them back." "Someone with discipline called them back," Old Wolf corrected. "They're assessing. That was reconnaissance by fire, kid. They wanted to know where your position was." Emily stared at the scrubland. The amber haze was beginning to settle, the wind dropping as the storm moved west. In another 20 minutes, visibility would be back to near normal, which meant the calibrated optics she'd been thinking about all day would have clean air to work in. "I need to move," she said. "Agreed, but not yet. Give it 10 minutes. Let them think you're still in the same spot. Then move." Emily pressed herself back from the scope. She looked at the cracked ceiling of the control tower, at the sky showing through the gaps in the concrete. Her heart rate was already normalizing. The shot had been clean. The threat was real. But something about the attack still nagged at her. 8 fighters, coordinated, well-spaced, and they had stopped the moment they were engaged. Not because of casualties, but because someone told them to stop. They had gotten what they came for. They knew where she was. Emily moved her primary position at 1640. She went slow and low through the interior of the control tower, down a rubble-choked stairwell to the second level of the adjacent radar building, where a collapsed section of the roof created a natural hide with sight lines along both the eastern and northern approaches. She'd identified this fallback position on her first night. She always identified 3 before she committed to 1. The new angle opened a different view of the civilian population below, and through the thermal overlay on her scope, battery-powered, clipped to the rail, the picture changed. Heat signatures. The terminal building glowed with body heat from the hundreds of people packed inside. The hangars were bright blobs. The open tarmac was cooler, standard distribution. But near the rear wall of Hangar 3, something was wrong. The crates from last night's supply trucks had been moved. Not moved to another location, moved into formation, stacked in an L shape near the hangar's rear vehicle door. Emily had seen that configuration before, in training, in briefings, in photographs from post-incident analyses of IED staging sites. You stacked things in an L when you were protecting them from blast, when you expected things nearby to explode and you wanted the cargo to survive. She was still processing that when a figure moved near the rear hangar door. She focused the thermal. A single person, moving in a way that made her pause the scope entirely. Low, deliberate. The torso angled forward at the waist in a way that civilians almost never moved. It was a shooter's posture, weight distributed for quick lateral movement, the upper body positioned to absorb recoil without telegraphing it. The figure paused at the corner of the hangar, oriented northeast for 3 full seconds, then withdrew back inside, checking sightlines. Emily's jaw tightened. She keyed her radio, kept her voice flat. Wolf, Hangar 3, rear vehicle door. You have thermal on that angle? Negative. Fuel depot puts me at the wrong angle for Hangar 3's rear. Someone just checked the northeast sightline from that position. Military bearing, not militia-grade movement. Old Wolf was quiet for a moment. That's the 3rd time today something hasn't added up. I know. You're not going to like where this goes. I already don't like it, Emily said. She held the scope on the rear hangar door. The figure did not reappear. Inside the building, the heat signature mass of the civilian population moved and shifted in the normal rhythms of people trying to stay comfortable in a 100-degree shelter, indistinguishable from any other cluster of bodies. That was the point. Whoever this was, whoever was moving with that posture inside a refugee shelter, they had chosen their cover deliberately. They were not a militia fighter. Militia fighters took cover outside structures, in the scrubland, on the approach roads. They didn't embed themselves in the middle of 400 civilians and check sightlines in the dark. This was something different. This was someone who had been trained to be invisible. Emily lowered the scope for a moment. She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose, thinking. The calibration shot from the northeast. The approach route. The crates staged for blast protection. And now this figure. She pulled out her notepad and wrote a single word. Sniper. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she wrote a second word beneath it. Inside. By 1800, Emily had a theory. She didn't like it. She found Okafor at his position near the Western Fuel Depot, a compact, serious-faced man from Ohio who had done 2 tours in Afghanistan before this assignment and who listened without interrupting, which Emily respected. The attack at 1617, she said, 8 fighters, well coordinated. They broke off immediately after I made contact. I've been thinking about why. Reconnaissance, Okafor said. He'd already reached the same conclusion. Reconnaissance, Emily confirmed. But that's not the whole picture. I want your team to open every one of those crates in Hangar 3. Tonight, quietly. Don't announce it, just do it. Okafor's expression shifted. The Red Crescent shipment? I don't think it's a Red Crescent shipment. He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once. I'll handle it personally. She left him and went back to her position. 20 minutes later, his voice came over the radio. Careful and controlled, but with something underneath it. Sergeant Carter, you need to hear this. She was already moving toward him. The crates had been opened. Under a layer of legitimate medical supplies, bandages, saline bags, blister-packed antibiotics, the lower sections of each crate were packed with components. Not weapons in the traditional sense, not rifles or ammunition. Components. Machine metal parts, wiring harnesses, sealed electronics modules. Okafor had an ordnance background from his first deployment. He recognized the components before Emily did. Guidance packages, he said quietly, standing over the open crates in the dim light of the hangar. The civilians 30 feet away behind a partition wall, oblivious. Precision strike guidance packages. These go into modified artillery rockets. He looked up at her. Whoever put these here, they're not trying to take the airport. Emily stared at the components. Her mind was moving fast now, assembling the pieces that had been accumulating since before dawn. The three men with wrong patterns, the calibration shot, the sniper moving inside the civilian shelter, the attack that was reconnaissance, not assault. And now this. They're using the airport, she said slowly. As a transit point, Okafor finished. The civilian population is cover. The humanitarian situation is cover. If they can hold this airport or get someone inside to hand it over, they can move these components east along the highway corridor without anyone stopping them. Emily turned toward the hangar doors, looking out at the dark runway. The amber haze of the departed sandstorm still tinged the horizon orange to the west. 411 civilians, used as a shield, as a logistical asset, as a reason for the international community to keep their hands off this airfield while the real cargo moved. There's someone on the inside helping them, she said. It wasn't a question. Has to be, Okafor said. Those crates came through our intake checkpoint. Someone cleared them. Emily thought of the figure in the hangar, the shooter's posture, the sightline check. It's not just a facilitator, she said. There's a trained asset embedded with the civilian population. I've been watching them. She keyed her radio. Wolf. I'm here. This is bigger than a militia push to seize the airport. This is a weapons pipeline operation. The airport is the way station. The civilians are the camouflage. She paused. And we've got an unknown hostile actor inside the wire. Old Wolf was quiet for 3 full seconds. Well, he said finally, in the tone of a man who had seen variations of this situation before and found none of them pleasant. That changes the math considerably. Yeah, Emily said, it does. She looked at the open crates, at the guidance packages that could turn unguided rockets into precision weapons, at the sleeping children behind the partition wall, 30 feet away, innocent of everything happening around them. 72 hours had been the mission window. She'd burned through most of the first day, and the situation had already transformed from a defensive hold into something that had no clean name in any field manual she'd ever read. She closed the nearest crate. Get your team fed and rotated, she told Okafor. Full alert from 2200. Nobody sleeps through tonight. She walked back out onto the tarmac. Above her, the first stars were appearing through the clearing haze. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the perimeter wire, the desert was very quiet. Too quiet for what she knew was out there. She climbed back to her position, settled her cheek against the stock, and began the long work of watching the dark. The shot came at 0347. Emily was awake. She was always awake at that hour, the body's lowest point, the window when attention frayed at the edges, and discipline was the only thing holding the line. She had been running a slow thermal sweep of the eastern perimeter, methodical, sector by sector, the way Old Wolf had drilled into her until it became reflex rather than thought. The round hit the concrete lip of the radar building 2 inches from her scope. The impact was simultaneous with the sound, a flat, hard crack that arrived without warning because the shooter had been careful about distance and angle. The concrete exploded in a spray of gray dust. Emily was already moving, rolling hard left, pressing flat against the floor, the rifle dragging beside her. She did not breathe for 4 seconds. Then she was up in a crouch, back against the interior wall, scope angled toward the gap in the roofline without exposing her silhouette. Nothing. The darkness outside was absolute. No moon, thin starlight only. The kind of night that ate distances in confused angles. Her radio was in her hand. Wolf, shot fired at my position. Single round, suppressed. Direction, northeast, approximately 400 to 600 meters. No visible muzzle flash. Old Wolf's response came back in under 3 seconds. He had been awake too. Confirm suppressed? Confirm, I heard the impact before the report. He's using a can and subsonic, or he's far enough that the sound arrived degraded. Elevation angle on the impact? Emily thought. Slightly downward, maybe 2 to 3 degrees. He's elevated, not ground level. A pause. There's a ridge line northeast, about 520 meters, maybe half a meter of natural cover if you know where to look. He knows where to look. Yeah, another pause. Kid, that was not a kill shot. She had already reached the same conclusion. At 500 meters against a stationary target in a fixed position, a trained sniper didn't miss by 2 inches, not unless they were aiming for 2 inches away. The round had been placed to scare her, to force her to move, to reveal a new position by her reaction. Or it had been placed to confirm she was still alive. He was checking, she said, making sure he didn't just waste a day of work watching an empty building, Old Wolf said. Now he knows you're here and you're active. Emily looked at the concrete dust still drifting in the still air of the radar room. 2 inches. She felt the familiar cold clarity that came after near misses. Not relief, not adrenaline, just the arithmetic of survival, clean and precise. I need to find a third position before dawn. Agreed, but move slow. He'll be watching your exits. She took 60 seconds to study her options. 3 potential routes out of the radar building. The west stairwell was exposed to the northeast ridgeline for about 4 meters. The east window drop was 8 feet to rubble, noisy, slow. The interior passage through the collapsed terminal connector was dark, covered, and would put her behind the terminal's main wall, fully shielded from the northeast. She went through the terminal connector. She moved 2 centimeters at a time. It took her 11 minutes to cover 40 feet, but she arrived at her third position, a sniper's hide in the gutted upper floor of the terminal's air traffic management annex, without exposing herself once. She settled into the new angle, oriented northeast, and began the process of reading the ridgeline in the dark. He was out there, good, patient, disciplined. She started building a picture of him the way you built a picture of any problem, from the edges inward, from what you knew toward what you didn't. She started with what she knew. He had calibrated in the morning wind. He had waited for darkness. He had aimed to probe, not kill. He had anticipated her position, which meant he had been watching the airport long enough to track her movements. Not malicious, she thought, not even close. She thought of the figure in Hangar 3, the shooter's posture, the sightline check. She thought about what kind of asset you embedded inside a refugee population to serve as a forward observer for a counter-sniper operation. Her jaw tightened. 2 threats, one inside the wire, one outside, working together. Dawn came in stages, first the gray, then the rose, then the white. Emily had been in her third position for 4 hours when Old Wolf called her at 0612. I've been going over the shot profile, he said. The elevation, the distance, the timing, the ammunition selection. I want to run something by you. Go ahead. Iranian sniper doctrine uses a specific probe methodology when operating in urban adjacent environments. Single-shot confirmation at maximum effective range, subsonic load, elevated firing position. The objective isn't to kill, it's to establish the target's reaction time and fallback pattern. They call it tar-e-say, shadow mapping. Emily was quiet for a moment. You're saying this is IRGC-trained? I'm saying the methodology matches what we know about IRGC sniper instructor curriculum, which puts us against someone who didn't just pick up a rifle in a militia camp. He paused. This person has been running a program, training other snipers. The probe last night wasn't reconnaissance, it was a lesson. Our friend out there has done this before, many times, under instructional conditions. How does that change my approach? It means he's going to be patient in ways that will feel unnatural. He'll wait longer than you expect. He'll move less than you expect. And when he does move, it'll be in a way designed to confirm your position, not expose his. Another pause. He's also going to try to get inside your head, create situations that force you to make choices where every option costs you something. Emily stared at the ridgeline through her scope. In the morning light it was clear now, a low, broken ridge of compacted sand and rock, dotted with scrub brush, featureless to an untrained eye. But she'd been studying it for 4 hours. She knew where the depressions were. She knew where the natural shooting platform would be if you were lying prone at the crest. She saw nothing. He's already moved, she said, almost certainly. He won't be on that ridge again. He won't be anywhere you've already looked, Old Wolf said. That's the other thing about IRGC-trained shooters. They're taught that a position used is a position burned. Single use, absolute. He fired once from that ridge. He'll never go back. Emily processed this. Single-use positions meant constant movement. Constant movement was exhausting, logistically demanding, required extensive pre-planning of the operational area, which meant their opponent had been mapping this airport for days, possibly weeks, before the civilian population even arrived. This had been planned long before the militia attack, long before the guidance packages were trucked in. He has a code name, Emily said. It wasn't a question. If this is who I think it is, Old Wolf said slowly, the Israeli intelligence people have been looking for him for about 18 months. He goes by the Falcon, IRGC Sniper Division, former instructor at their Imam Ali training complex. He paused. Emily, this man has confirmed kills at over 1,400 meters in 3 different conflict zones. She felt the weight of that settle over her. You know him, she said. A longer pause this time. I know of him. Intel reports. After-action briefings from Israeli colleagues. He exhaled. But there's something else. Something I should have told you last night. Tell me now. I was involved in an operation in '94, Old Wolf said. Cold War holdover. Won't bore you with the politics. We were running a counter-sniper program against a Soviet-trained asset in the Balkans. Very similar profile, embedded intelligence, civilian cover, long-range isolation of an airfield. He stopped. What happened? We didn't identify the embedded forward observer until too late. The sniper outside wasn't the main threat. The person inside the wire was. His voice was steady, but she heard something underneath it. Something old and settled and heavy. We lost 3 people because we were focused on the wrong direction. Emily understood why he was telling her now. The asset in Hangar 3, she said, is your priority, Old Wolf said, not the Falcon. The Falcon is dangerous. The asset inside is catastrophic. She looked down at the civilian population beginning to stir in the early morning light below. Children emerging from the hangar doors, the smell of cook fires starting. 411 people, most of whom had no idea that the man or woman moving among them was feeding targeting data to a trained killer outside the wire. I'll find them, she said. The missile hit the terminal at 0941. Emily felt the concussion in her teeth before she heard the explosion. The upper section of the terminal's main facade collapsed inward, tons of concrete and glass dropping in a slow, terrible avalanche onto the departure hall where 200 civilians had been sheltering. The dust cloud that rose was enormous, gray-white against the blue morning sky, boiling upward and outward. Then the screaming started. She forced herself not to move. Not yet. Her hands were tight on the rifle, her jaw clenched against the instinct to run toward the sound. She swept the scope east and north, looking for the launch point. Secondary attack often followed a strike. Hit and displace the target, then push through the chaos. She found the launch point. A flatbed truck, parked in a ravine 800 meters northeast, the signature of a rocket launcher still visible in the thermal, hot metal cooling fast as the crew worked to reload. She was calculating the shot when she saw the secondary movement. Fighters, a dozen at least, coming out of the scrubland on the eastern approach, moving fast toward the perimeter fence. exploiting the chaos and the attention pulled toward the terminal collapse. She keyed her radio. Okafor, secondary assault incoming from the east. 12 plus. Get your team on the fence line now. We've got casualties in the terminal. I know. Fence line first. If they breach, the casualties get worse. She hated saying it. She said it anyway. She shifted to the rocket truck. 800 meters, crosswind left to right at about 7 knots. Slight elevation drop from her position to the target. She breathed once. The calculation ran in the background, automatic, the way it always was at this distance. The shot broke. The truck's engine block absorbed the round, but that wasn't the target. The target was the gunner reloading the second rocket into the launch rail. He dropped. The second crew member grabbed the rocket. She cycled and fired again. 2 shots, both connected. The truck wasn't going anywhere, and neither rocket was getting launched. But the civilians were pouring out of the terminal collapse now, hundreds of them, streaming onto the tarmac in a terrified mass, running in every direction, crying, calling for family members, dragging wounded. The runway became chaos within 90 seconds. She could see injuries, a woman with a head wound, a man carrying a child who was not moving, an elderly man sitting in the middle of the tarmac with both hands pressed to his face. Emily watched Okafor's 4 soldiers engage the eastern assault. The fighters were slowing, taking fire, but they kept coming. Too many for 4 rifles, she calculated quickly. She shifted back to the eastern assault, found the squad leader. She could tell by the positioning, always the one slightly behind the lead element, directing. She fired. The leader dropped. The assault faltered. She cycled, found the next most purposeful mover, fired. The assault broke at the fence line. The fighters fell back into the scrubland, dragging their dead. Emily's hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled, but her eyes kept moving to the civilians on the runway, the injured, the panicked, the children separated from parents in the chaos. 411 people, now exposed, now on the tarmac, now perfect targets for anyone, inside or outside the wire, who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Wolf," she said, "we need to get them back inside." "Okafor's already on it." A pause. "Emily, hangar 3, the rear door." She swung the scope. The rear vehicle door of hangar 3 was open. A figure was moving through it, going from the hangar into the service road behind, moving fast, using the chaos. She locked onto the figure. Male, slight build, moving with that same low, disciplined posture she'd seen twice before. Going north, toward the perimeter fence. "I see him," she said. "Don't lose him." She tracked. He reached the fence line, paused, looked around once, checking whether the chaos had covered his movement, and then crouched beside a section of fence that had been cut previously and reattached with wire ties. Not welded, just held in place to look intact. He pulled the ties. The section swung open. "He's breaching the north perimeter," Emily said. "On foot." "Let him go," Old Wolf said immediately. "What?" "Let him go. He's a messenger. He's carrying something. Coordinates, timing, information from inside. If you take him now, they send someone else and we don't know who. If you let him go and track where he's heading, he leads us to the command node." Emily held the figure in the scope for 3 long seconds. In her crosshair, clean shot, 210 meters. She took her finger off the trigger. "He's through the fence," she said, moving north-northeast. "I have eyes on him from the fuel depot angle," Old Wolf said. "I'll track as long as I can." Emily lowered the scope for a moment. She pressed her knuckle against her lip, watching the chaos on the tarmac below. Okafor's team was moving civilians back toward the intact hangars. The terminal collapse was being assessed. She could see the search efforts beginning, people digging through rubble for survivors. The airport had just become a different place than it was this morning. More broken, more exposed, more dangerous. And somewhere in the scrubland to the north, a messenger was running with information that would shape the next phase of the attack. The jamming began at 11:03. It didn't start all at once. It crept in, a degradation of signal quality that Emily first noticed as increased static on the ground frequency, then a loss of the satellite uplink, then the Israeli liaison frequency going to pure white noise. By 11:15, every radio in the airport was broadcasting and receiving nothing but interference. Old Wolf recognized it before she did. Active jamming, not atmospheric. Someone turned on a system. The messenger. He reached their command element. This is the next phase. A pause, and then his voice cut out entirely. Emily clicked the transmit button 3 times. No response. She switched frequencies, ran through the backup channels, tried the emergency burst transmitter clipped to her vest. Nothing. She was operating alone now. She made a quick assessment. Okafor's team was visible from her position. She could see 2 of his 4 soldiers near the eastern fence, maintaining their positions. The civilians were back in the hangars. The tarmac had cleared. The immediate threat had stabilized. But she had no drone feed, no satellite, no radio contact with Old Wolf or anyone else outside the airport. For all she knew, the evacuation convoy had been rerouted, delayed, or stopped entirely. For all she knew, the 72-hour window had just been compressed to something much shorter. She needed to reach Old Wolf physically. She was mapping the route from the terminal annex to the fuel depot, roughly 200 meters of partially exposed ground, when the shot hit. It didn't hit her. It hit the section of the exterior wall she had been leaning against 30 seconds earlier, before she stood up to plan the route. 30 seconds. The Falcon had anticipated her movement, had calculated where she would be based on her previous patterns, had fired at the location she would occupy, not the location she was in. She dropped flat, rolled behind the interior partition wall. The round had punched clean through 6 inches of exterior masonry. She could see the hole, the shaft of daylight through it, the dust still drifting. She pressed her back against the partition and assessed herself. No injury. The round had struck 3 feet above floor level and 2 feet to her left. If she had still been crouching at the wall instead of standing, it would have been a headshot. Standing had saved her life. She held that thought for a moment, turned it over. He miscalculated the elevation. He had expected her to be crouching, lower profile, less exposure, the natural instinct. Standing to plan a route was a behavioral deviation he hadn't accounted for. Every time he missed, he was giving her information. She filed it and moved. Low and fast through the interior of the annex, down the back stairwell, out into the covered passageway that ran along the terminal's interior wall toward the western side of the building. It took her 6 minutes to reach a position with visual on the fuel depot. Old Wolf was not at his post. She felt the first real cold spike of concern since the operation began. She scanned. The fuel depot observation post was empty. She widened the scan. Nothing near the depot itself. Nothing along the service road. Then she found him. 30 meters east of the depot, in the shadow of the perimeter wall. Sitting with his back against the concrete, one leg extended, the other drawn up. His hand was pressed against his upper left arm. Wounded. She was moving before she finished the assessment. She reached him in 4 minutes of hard, covered movement. She crouched beside him and pulled his hand away from the wound. Entry and exit, through the meat of the upper arm. The bone intact based on his grip strength, which was still firm when he closed his fingers around her forearm as she examined him. Through and through, he said. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the effort in it. Hit me when I was moving between positions during the strike. You didn't tell me. Radio was already degrading, and you had 12 fighters coming at the fence. You still should have told me. He almost smiled. Noted. Patch me up and let's talk. I managed to track the messenger before comms went down. Emily worked quickly, pressure dressing from the kit on her vest, cinched tight, checked for arterial bleed. Clean. Painful, but clean. He would have full arm function within days. The messenger was heading toward the ridge system north of the airfield, Old Wolf said while she worked. About 800 meters out there's a defilade, low ground between two ridge lines, invisible from the airfield. Classic command hide position. That's where the Falcon is operating from. That's where the operation is running from. The Falcon may or may not be physically present. He'll be moving constantly. But the command node, the radio relay, the coordination element, it's in that defilade. He looked at her steadily. Emily, I can't operate at full effectiveness right now. You need to know that and factor it in. She met his eyes. You're still my eyes on the western side. I can do that, but the aggressive movement, the extended tracking, that's yours now. She nodded once. She had known this was possible from the moment she saw him against the wall. The asset from Hangar 3, she said, he went north. He knows this airport better than we do. He's been here from the beginning, which means he knows our positions, our patterns, our team strength. Old Wolf paused. He's been reporting everything. Emily thought about 411 civilians, about the guidance packages in the crates, about the missile that had just collapsed the terminal and driven 400 people onto the tarmac in panic, about the Israeli aircraft, Elijah, coming at some unknown hour. They've been building towards something, she said. The attack this morning, the jamming, the messenger, they're sequencing. What's the next sequence? She looked at the smoke still rising from the terminal collapse. Supply, she said. They cut our eyes. They cut our comms. Next, they cut our mobility. She looked at Old Wolf. The fuel depot. He glanced at the depot behind him. That's why they put me on it. And that's why the missile hit the terminal instead of the depot. They want the fuel intact. She stood. I need to get Okafor's team repositioned. The eastern assault was a feint. The real push is coming from the north. Go, Old Wolf said. I'll hold the depot. Don't move from cover. I'm 62 years old with a hole in my arm, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She went. They came for the fuel depot at 1340. Emily had repositioned Okafor's team by 1200. 2 soldiers on the north fence line, 2 covering the fuel depot approach road. She had explained her reasoning without giving more detail than necessary. Okafor hadn't questioned it. He understood the tactical logic, and he trusted the assessment. The attackers came from the north, as she'd predicted. Not a large force, 8 fighters, moving in 2 elements along the service road that ran parallel to the perimeter fence on the northern side. They were using the civilian supply vehicles as partial concealment, trucks that had been parked along the service road since the initial civilian influx. Standard tactic. Use the environment, use the cover that was already there. But Emily had anticipated the approach route. She had positioned herself on the roof of the maintenance equipment shed adjacent to the fuel depot. Low profile, direct sight line down the service road, 300 meters of effective engagement space before the road bent out of her angle. She held her fire until the lead element was 60 meters from the depot gate. Okafor, execute. The 2 soldiers on the north fence opened up on the trailing element simultaneously, with Emily engaging the lead. The attack compressed instantly, fighters suddenly receiving fire from 2 angles, the road offering no lateral cover, the civilian vehicles providing concealment from one direction but not the other. The engagement lasted 4 minutes. 3 fighters were down before they could react. 2 more were hit and dragged back by their partners. The remaining 3 broke and ran north along the fence line. Emily tracked the runners. She could have taken clean shots on 2 of them. She didn't. They were running north. Back toward the defilade. Back toward the command node. She let them carry their fear with them. Fuel depot is clear, she called on the ground frequency. The short-range tactical net was still working, just the satellite and long-range comms that were jammed. Any casualties? Negative, one of Okafor's soldiers responded. Negative casualties. Old Wolf's voice came through, slightly strained with the effort of using the radio one-handed. Good call on the repositioning. They'll try again, Emily said. Different approach next time. Different approach, he agreed. But they're burning assets. 8 fighters this morning, 8 more now. 16 total, at least 4 confirmed dead. They're not a limitless force. They don't need to be limitless. They just need to hold long enough for whatever they're sequencing toward. She climbed down from the shed roof. She pulled out her notepad. She wrote, "What is the sequence ending at?" She stared at it. The guidance packages, the airport, the Israeli aircraft, Elijah, inbound at an unknown hour. She wrote, "Elijah." She stared at that too. The Falcon's next move wasn't a bullet, it was a child. At 15:10, Emily was scanning the northern approach from a new position, the collapsed radar station antenna tower, accessible via a service ladder from the maintenance shed. From the top of the tower, she had a 360-degree view of the airport and surrounding terrain. But the position was exposed, and she could only hold it for short windows before becoming predictable. She was in the middle of a sweep when she saw the boy. 7, maybe 8 years old. He had wandered from the hangar group. Children did this, parents exhausted and inattentive after the chaos of the morning, and he was walking alone across the tarmac toward the northern perimeter fence. Just walking, the way children walked when they saw something interesting in the distance and moved toward it without thinking about what was between them and it. He was directly in the axis of fire between Emily's current position and the ridgeline north of the airport. He was also, she realized with cold clarity, directly in the axis of fire between her current position and anywhere the Falcon might be setting up right now. He was bait. Not the child himself. The child was innocent, oblivious. But whoever was orchestrating this from the command node had been watching the airport long enough to understand how Emily operated. A civilian in her line of fire would force one of 2 outcomes. She would break position to redirect the child, exposing herself in the process, or she would hold position and be predictable, frozen, immovable, for the next 30 to 60 seconds while the child cleared the area. Either way, the Falcon got a window. Emily was on the service ladder in 3 seconds, down 2 rungs, transitioning to ground level in a controlled drop that kept the antenna tower between her and the northern ridge. She moved along the base of the tower, used the maintenance shed for cover, then broke into the open for the 4 seconds it took to cross the gap to the hangar wall. She moved along the hangar wall, staying in its shadow, and reached a junior member of Okafor's team, a young specialist named Rhodes, who was holding a position near the hangar door. "The child on the tarmac," Emily said quietly. "Go get him. Don't run. Walk normally. Take him back to his family. Do not look north. Do not change your behavior in any way that would suggest you've seen a threat." Rhodes nodded and went. Emily watched from the shadow of the hangar. Rhodes walked calmly across the tarmac, crouched beside the boy, said something that made the child look up with a startled expression, and then led him back toward the hangar. Normal. Unhurried. Nothing she could do confirmed or denied whether she had identified the tactic. When the child was inside, she took a different route back toward the eastern side of the airport, put herself in a new position, and sat still for 20 minutes without moving. The Falcon did not fire. But at 15:45, a shot struck the base of the radar antenna tower, exactly where she had been standing when she first saw the child. She hadn't been there for 35 minutes. He was reconstructing her path, working backward from where she had been, trying to establish where she would go next. It was patient, systematic work, the kind of profiling that came from long experience running counter-sniper operations. "You're very good," she said quietly, to no one. She thought of what Old Wolf had said. "He'll create situations where every option costs you something." The cost of not breaking position would have been the child's exposure. The cost of breaking position was revealing her movement pattern. She had chosen the child. She would always choose the child, which meant the Falcon knew something essential about her now. She settled into her new position, the northeast corner of the maintenance hangar, behind a stack of ground service equipment, sight lines east and north, and spent 20 minutes doing nothing but thinking about the shape of the mine she was dealing with. The Falcon had been running this operation for weeks, possibly months. He had mapped the airport from the outside before the civilian population arrived. He had embedded an asset inside the civilian flow. He had pre-positioned the guidance packages through the supply chain. He had selected his firing positions in advance, planned his movement routes, accounted for the sandstorm window. Every action was deliberate, layered, pre-calculated, which meant he had also calculated for her. She had been at this airport for 36 hours. He had been planning against the contingency of a U.S. sniper for longer than that. Because Kataib al-Rayat's intelligence network would have known a U.S. advisory presence was possible once the Joint Task Force established its operational footprint. He would not have left that variable unaccounted for. He would have a profile of her before she had a profile of him. She thought about that, what the profile would say. Female, 27, U.S. Army, attached to JTF. Record. Previous deployments. Any incident of note. Her jaw tightened. There had been an incident. 2 years ago in eastern Syria, a civilian casualty, a decision made in fractions of a second with incomplete information, a decision that the subsequent investigation had found justified under the circumstances, a decision that nevertheless sat in her chest like a stone she carried everywhere. If the Falcon had access to her file, and IRGC intelligence networks had access to a great deal, he would know about that incident. He would know she was not a person who fired casually at civilian-adjacent targets, which was exactly what he had been exploiting all day. The child, the sedan behind the convoy, every situation he created had a civilian variable woven into it, forcing her to slow, to calculate, to hesitate in windows where hesitation created exposure. He wasn't just trying to kill her, he was trying to break her firing discipline by making every shot feel like the worst day of her life. She felt something harden in her chest. Not anger. Anger made you sloppy. Something colder and more useful than anger. Clarity. She would have to change everything. Her movement patterns, her position selection logic, her response timing. She would need to become unpredictable in ways that her previous behavior had not been. And she would need to stop reacting to what the Falcon showed her and start forcing him to react to what she showed him. She pulled out her notepad and spent 5 minutes writing down everything she knew about his methodology. Then she spent another 5 minutes writing down everything she intended to do differently. She tore the page out, folded it, and put it in her breast pocket. Time to become someone he hadn't planned for. The break came from an unexpected direction. At 17:20, one of the men Emily had been tracking since the first morning, the one who had been measuring pace near Cargo East, made a mistake. He had been careful for 36 hours, moving slowly, maintaining his cover, behaving just enough like a displaced civilian to pass the cursory checks Okafor's team was able to conduct with 4 soldiers managing 400 people. But at 17:20, under pressure from the sequence of events that had been unfolding all day, he moved quickly. He went to Hangar 3, not to the main space where the civilians were sheltering, to the rear, to the crates. Okafor's team had replaced the crates as found after the inspection. The red crescent markings visible, the contents resealed. Emily had instructed this specifically. Replace everything, appear not to know. A surveillance trap. The man opened the nearest crate, checked the contents, removed something small. Emily could see it in the scope but couldn't identify it at this range, and pocketed it. Then he closed the crate and began moving toward the rear vehicle door. Okafor, Emily called on the ground net. Hangar 3 rear, take him. Okafor's team intercepted the man at the rear door within 30 seconds. Emily watched the takedown from her position. Controlled, quiet, fast enough that none of the civilians in the main hangar space registered it. The man was subdued without a shot fired. She went to Okafor's forward position, where they had taken the subject into a side room of the maintenance workshop. He was sitting on the floor, wrists zip-tied, breathing hard. Mid-30s, lean. The careful, blank expression of someone who had been trained to resist initial interrogation. Don't speak, don't react, buy time. Emily crouched in front of him. She was not interested in a long conversation. The guidance packages in the crates, she said. Where are they going? He said nothing. She pulled out her notepad, turned it so he could see what she'd written on it. The word Elijah. Something moved in his eyes. The Israeli aircraft, she said. That's what the guidance packages are for. The airport isn't a way station. She watched his face. The airport is the launch point. He kept his expression blank, but his breathing changed. Fractionally. Enough. She stood up. Okafor, keep him isolated. I need to find Old Wolf. She found him at the fuel depot. He looked pale. The wound was taking a toll, but his eyes were clear and his mind was sharp. She told him what she'd extrapolated. He was quiet for a long moment. The guidance packages, he said slowly. Modified artillery rockets, precision-guided. He looked at her. If you can target an aircraft on approach, on a fixed approach path, following a published instrument landing system, a precision-guided rocket at airport range is a different weapon than a field rocket. Emily felt the pieces locked together. The airport had an ILS, an instrument landing system, the radio guidance beam that told aircraft exactly where the runway was, exactly what altitude and angle to fly, in any visibility. The system had been offline since the airport closed, but the antenna array was still in place, still functional, still broadcasting its frequencies. They're going to bring Elijah in on the ILS, she said. Standard instrument approach, full predictability. The aircraft will be on a fixed path, known altitude, known heading for the last 6 minutes of approach. And a precision-guided rocket launched from inside the airport perimeter would be virtually impossible to miss. Emily closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them. This was never about taking the airport. They don't want the airport. They want to use it once, for one aircraft, and then it doesn't matter what happens to it. Old Wolf looked at her steadily. When is Elijah inbound? He asked. I don't know. Comms are jammed. I can't ask. Best estimate from the briefing? She thought back to Hargrove's voice. At some point during the operational window, 72 hours from the mission start, she was 38 hours in. Anywhere from now to 34 hours from now, she said. We can't narrow it beyond that. Then we have less time than we thought, Old Wolf said, and the Falcon is out there making sure we can't stop it. At 1850, the convoy appeared on the western approach road. Not the evacuation convoy, a different convoy. 3 trucks, civilian markings, moving east along the highway that ran past the airport's western gate. Slow, steady. The kind of movement that looked like normal civilian resupply. Emily was on the western side of the airport when she picked them up through her scope. She swept across the lead truck's cab. Driver, passenger. Then she moved to the cargo beds. The trucks were loaded. She could see the shapes under the tarpaulins. Cylindrical, long, consistent. Rocket bodies. Not the guidance packages. Those were already inside the airport. The rockets themselves. The delivery vehicles. Wolf, she said. Western approach. 3 trucks. I see them. He was back at the fuel depot, one-armed but functional. Rocket airframes under cover. They're bringing in the rest of the system. If those trucks reach the airport and link up with the guidance packages inside, we have everything we need for an ILS-guided strike on an aircraft on approach, Emily finished. She did the math. The trucks were 700 meters out and moving at roughly 20 kilometers per hour. They would reach the western gate in approximately 2 minutes. She had 1 clean shot on the lead truck. The follow-on trucks would stop or scatter after the first shot. But a stopped truck with rocket airframes on a public highway was not a solved problem. The airframes would still be accessible, the guidance packages were already inside the airport, and the personnel who knew how to assemble the system would still be alive. But there was a civilian vehicle on the road behind the convoy, an old sedan moving at the same pace as the trucks, following at 50 meters. She could see it clearly, a family based on the silhouettes. Adult driver, adult passenger, something small in the rear seat. If she took the lead truck at this range, the secondary explosions from the rocket airframes, even unguided, even unfueled, could produce enough fragmentation to reach the sedan at 50 meters. She held the lead truck in her crosshair. The sedan was 50 meters behind. "Wolf," she said, "the vehicle behind the convoy." "I see it. If I take the lead truck and secondary detonation occurs, 50-meter standoff with fragmenting cargo." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Emily's finger was on the trigger. The trucks were now 600 meters out. 1 minute, 40 seconds. "Is there a shot that stops the convoy without secondary?" she asked. It was partly tactical, partly the question she asked herself when she needed to hear it out loud. "Not at this range, not with what you're carrying." 1 minute 20. The family in the sedan. "I know." 1 minute. She thought of the child on the tarmac, the choice she had made. She would always choose the child. But this wasn't a child against her own exposure. This was a possible risk to a family against a certain risk to an aircraft full of people, and whatever regional escalation would follow a precision strike on an Israeli evacuation flight. She thought of Old Wolf in the Balkans. We were focused on the wrong direction. "Is there another option?" she asked. Silence on the radio for 4 seconds. 5. "The gate," Old Wolf said suddenly. "The western gate. If I can get Rhodes to the gate controls in the next 30 seconds and lock it, the trucks stop at the gate. They can't breach a locked vehicle gate at speed without making a lot of noise. They'll stall. The family gets clear." Emily was already moving. "Rhodes, western gate, controlled. Now." She hit her radio. "Now." Rhodes acknowledged. She heard him running. The trucks were 400 meters out. Rhodes was 150 meters from the gate. Emily held the lead truck, prepared for the shot that would be necessary if Rhodes didn't make it. 300 meters. Rhodes hit the gate controls. She could see him at the panel. The gates began to close. Old hydraulic mechanisms, slow, the kind that closed at the pace of bureaucracy rather than warfare. 200 meters. The lead truck driver saw the gates closing. He accelerated. Emily fired. Not at the cab, at the front left tire. At 200 meters, a tire shot was a precision shot with her platform. The tire blew. The truck lurched violently left, the driver fighting the wheel, decelerating hard. The following trucks braked. The lead truck stopped 40 meters short of the gate. The sedan behind the convoy braked and stopped, sat still for a moment. Then the sedan reversed, turned around, and drove back west at speed. Emily exhaled. "Trucks are stopped," she said. "Airframes are on the road. We need Okafor's team to secure that cargo before anyone reaches it." "Already calling it," Old Wolf said. She lowered the rifle. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. But for a moment, just a moment, she pressed her forehead against the warm metal of the scope housing and let herself feel the weight of the choice she had almost made. Then she picked her head up. She thought of every decision she'd made in the last 38 hours. The calibration shot she'd filed away at 0900. The figures she'd watched and tracked instead of engaged. The messenger she'd let run because Old Wolf was right, and it cost her nothing to be patient in that moment. Every choice had been made with imperfect information and a ticking clock. Every choice had been the best available option in the moment it was made. That didn't mean every choice had been clean. It meant she had done the work and made the call and would do it again with the same imperfect information and the same ticking clock, because that was the job. She had almost fired on a truck 50 meters ahead of a family sedan. She hadn't. She had fired on the tire instead, and it had worked. She filed that away too. Not as a success. Success was too simple a word for something that had turned on seconds and hydraulics in a tire shot at 200 meters. She filed it as information, a data point about what was possible when you held your discipline and found a third option that wasn't on the original menu. The Falcon wanted her to reduce every situation to a binary: shoot or don't shoot, move or stay, react or hold. She needed to stop accepting his framing. The Falcon was still out there. Elijah was still inbound. She had work to do. Okafor's team reached the stop convoy at 1920. Emily had moved to cover their approach from the south, watching the open ground around the stopped trucks for any follow-up threat. She expected one. The convoy stoppage would trigger a response from the command node. But the response that came was not what she expected. It came from Okafor himself, over the ground net, in the controlled voice of a man who had just found something that changed the shape of the situation. "Sergeant Carter, I need you at the lead truck. Now." She went. Okafor was standing at the open cab door of the lead truck, holding a document, a single sheet of paper, printed in a waterproof sleeve. He handed it to her without speaking. It was an approach plate, an instrument approach procedure chart for Al-Qaim Regional Airport, the ILS runway 27 approach, and it had been annotated in handwriting. The approach path marked clearly, the altitude checkpoints noted, and at the bottom of the chart, 2 words in English: Elijah, 0300. Emily stared at the 2 words. 0300, Okafor said quietly. 6 hours from now. She looked up at the darkening sky. Somewhere above the horizon, over the Mediterranean, over Israeli airspace, beginning its flight plan, an evacuation aircraft was running its pre-departure checks. Its crew would be briefed on the airfield status. They would be told it was secure. They would be told the ILS was active and reliable. They would not be told about the guidance packages already assembled in Hangar 3. "We have 6 hours," she said, "and no comms to warn them." She looked at the annotated approach plate. She thought about the jamming system, the messenger, the command node in the defilade, the Falcon somewhere in the dark beyond the perimeter, running his counter-sniper operation to make sure Emily could not stop what had been planned for months. The attack on the terminal, the attempted fuel depot seizure, the psychological pressure on her firing discipline, the communications blackout, all of it, every action since the operation began, had been sequenced toward 0300. Not to take the airport, to hold the airport's defender in place, bleed her resources, occupy her attention, keep her from finding the real weapon until it was too late to stop it. She handed the approach plate back to Okafor. "The jamming system," she said. "It's coming from the command node in the defilade north of the airport. If I can take out the jamming system, we get comms back. We warn Elijah. They abort the approach." "And the guidance packages?" Okafor asked. "Still here, still a threat to any future approach." She looked at him steadily. "Which means warning Elijah is not enough. We need to find the Falcon, take out his counter-sniper coverage, and then destroy those guidance packages before 0300. With 4 soldiers and 1 wounded advisor." "And me," Emily said. Okafor held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Then we'd better start," he said. Emily looked north. The night was settling over the desert, the last light fading from the western horizon, the stars beginning to assert themselves in the deep blue above. Somewhere in the darkness, the Falcon was waiting. Somewhere above the horizon, an aircraft was preparing to fly toward this runway at 0300. She had 6 hours. She turned toward the airport, walking fast. 2100 hours. 6 hours to Elijah. Emily laid out everything she had on the floor of the maintenance workshop. The annotated approach plate, her notepad, Okafor's hand-drawn map of the airport and surrounding terrain, the intel from the captured man in zip ties. Old Wolf sat against the wall behind her, his wounded arm immobilized against his chest, watching her work. "Walk me through the sequence," he said. She kept her eyes on the map. 3 problems, in order of urgency. She touched the map with one finger. First, the jamming system. It's running from the command node in the defilade, 800 meters north. No comms means Elijah doesn't know the airport is compromised. They'll fly the ILS approach exactly as planned, and they'll do it at 0300, regardless of what's happening on the ground. How do we kill the jamming? We find the system and destroy it, or we find the operator and stop them. Either works. She moved her finger. Second, the guidance packages in Hangar 3. Even if we warn Elijah off tonight, those packages stay in play. Any future approach to this airport is at risk until those components are destroyed. And third, Old Wolf said, the Falcon. She looked up. As long as he's operational, I can't move freely. He's been limiting my options all day. Every time I've needed to be somewhere quickly, he's been in a position to slow me down or force me into cover. Tonight I need to move fast and I need to move openly. She paused. I need to take him off the board before I go after the command node. Old Wolf was quiet for a moment. That's the right sequence. But the Falcon knows you've identified the jamming problem. He knows you'll go for the command node. He'll be positioned between you and it. I know. Which means going after him first puts you exactly where he wants you. Yes, Emily said. It does. She held Old Wolf's gaze. But I know something about him now that I didn't know this morning. What's that? He's been running this operation for months. He planned for a U.S. sniper. He has a profile on me. He knows about the Syria incident. He's been engineering situations that exploit my hesitation around civilians. She put her notepad down. He thinks he knows how I'll react to any given scenario. He's been playing against a version of me that he built from file information. And he hasn't met me yet. Not really. She picked up her rifle. Tonight I'm going to introduce myself. Old Wolf looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite pride, but the older and more serious thing that lived next to it. Rhodes and I will handle the guidance packages, he said. Once your shooting starts, the asset in the hangar will move. I'll be ready for him. Your arm. Rhodes does the heavy lifting. I provide the wisdom. He almost smiled. Go find your shooter, kid. Emily checked her kit. 6 magazines, thermal scope, battery at 60%, night vision monocular on a head mount, 2 fragmentation grenades, the personal radio on the ground net frequency, short range only, but enough for the airport footprint. She looked at Okafor. I need your 2 best soldiers on the northern perimeter. Not to engage, to be visible. I want the command node to see activity on the fence line and think I'm preparing a direct assault from inside the wire. Okafor understood immediately. Draw their attention north while you flank. I'll go east. Loop outside the perimeter through the scrubland. Come at the defilade from the southeast, the angle they won't be watching. She looked at the map. It's 1,600 meters of open desert in the dark. Single file, no lights, movement discipline. Okafor studied the route. Doable. I'm going alone, Emily said. He started to object. 1 person in the dark is invisible, she said. 2 people in the dark is a sound. I need invisible. She met his eyes. Hold the airport, protect the civilians, destroy those guidance packages on my signal. Okafor held her gaze for 2 seconds. Copy that, he said. Emily walked out of the maintenance workshop into the desert night. The stars were brilliant above her. The air had dropped 20 degrees since sunset, the desert cold arriving with its usual abruptness, and she could see her breath fogging slightly as she moved along the eastern perimeter fence toward the gap she'd identified earlier in the day. The civilian population was quiet, exhausted after the day's chaos, most of them sleeping in the hangars, the cook fires burned down to coals. She reached the fence gap, looked through it at the open desert. 6 hours. She went through. The desert at night was a different world. Emily moved east first, putting 500 meters between herself and the airport perimeter before turning north. She moved slowly, deliberately, each footfall placed before her weight committed to it. The night vision monocular gave the world a green-gray flatness that removed depth cues and demanded concentration. Every shadow potentially a depression, every pale patch potentially a rock. She had learned years ago that speed in night navigation was a false economy. A twisted ankle at 800 meters from the objective was a failed mission. She moved. She listened. The desert was not silent. It never was. There was wind, low, intermittent, and the distant sounds of the airport at her back, the occasional cough of a generator, the cry of a child settling in sleep. Ahead and to her north, the ridge lines were dark shapes against the slightly lighter sky. She navigated by the stars and by the terrain features she had memorized from the map. At the 40-minute mark, she was northeast of the airport, in the scrubland zone. She stopped, crouched, listened for 3 full minutes. Nothing artificial, no engine sound, no radio static, no human movement. She oriented toward the defilade. Based on Old Wolf's description, the low ground between two ridgelines, roughly 800 meters north of the airfield, she was now approaching from the southeast, which put her below and behind the ridge that formed the southern wall of the defilade. The command node would be watching north and east. They would have rear security, but rear security was always less attentive than the primary watch. She moved along the base of the southern ridge, staying in the deepest shadow. At the 50-minute mark, she heard the generator. It was faint, a small diesel unit, running quietly, the kind of noise that traveled far in still air. She oriented on it, northwest, 300 meters, maybe less. She turned off the night vision monocular. The generator meant lights inside the defilade, and lights meant her eyes would adjust naturally if she was patient. She was patient. She gave herself 4 minutes of darkness, acclimatization, lying flat against the base of the ridge, controlling her breathing. When she lifted her head, she could see it. A faint glow at the crest of the ridge, diffused upward from below. Someone had a light source in that low ground. Hooded, disciplined, only visible from directly above the defilade or from very close to the ridge crest. She was very close to the ridge crest. She began the climb. Hands and knees, 2 centimeters at a time. The soil was compacted sand over rock, firm, quiet under her weight if she distributed it correctly. She moved like water, finding the path of least resistance, her body low, her breathing through her nose. It took 11 minutes to cover 40 meters of vertical rise. At the crest, she pressed herself flat and looked over. The defilade was roughly 30 meters wide and 60 meters long. In the center, a tarpaulin had been rigged between 2 vehicles, a light truck and what appeared to be a modified communications van. Under the tarpaulin, a hooded work lamp illuminated a folding table covered with equipment. She could see the jamming system from here, a rack-mounted unit connected to a directional antenna array mounted on the van's roof. 2 operators sat at the table. 3 additional personnel were visible at the defilade's northern entrance, the primary watch facing north toward the desert and the distant lights of the regional highway. A 4th person stood at the southern entrance, 50 meters below and to her left, rear security. 6 people total, no sign of the Falcon. She had expected that. He would not be in the command node. He would be somewhere in the terrain between the airport and the defilade, covering the approach routes, managing the counter-sniper perimeter. She looked at the communications van, the jamming antenna. She looked at the operators. She had 2 fragmentation grenades. She looked at the 6 personnel. The 2 operators were within 5 meters of the jamming system. The rear security man was 50 meters away, facing south. If she moved along the ridge crest, she could get to within 20 meters of the tarpaulin before she was inside his effective visual range. She began moving. The rear security man was looking at his phone. Emily paused when she saw the glow. He had it cupped in both hands, angled low, and he was looking at it with the distracted attention of someone who had been on watch for 4 hours and was past the point where discipline held naturally. She could see his face in the reflected light, young, 25 at most, the posture of someone performing a job rather than executing a mission. She was 15 meters away. She assessed the options with the cold efficiency of someone who had no time for anything else. She needed the jamming system destroyed and comms restored. She needed the personnel neutralized without triggering an alert that would reach the Falcon before she was clear. And she needed to be back inside the airport perimeter before 0230 to coordinate the guidance package destruction. She pulled the first grenade. She had thrown grenades in training more times than she could count. She had thrown them in combat twice. The mechanics were automatic: the pull, the arc, the count. What was not automatic was the calculation of angle and distance in the dark. Against a target area cluttered with vehicles and personnel, and a tarpaulin that would either direct fragmentation or absorb it depending on how it fell. She threw it flat and hard, angled to skip off the near edge of the folding table and detonate under the tarpaulin. It didn't skip. It hit the table leg and detonated immediately. The explosion was contained and violent, the tarpaulin shredding in a fraction of a second, the communications van's side panels punching outward. The work lamp shattered. The jamming rack took fragmentation through its housing. She could see it in the brief illumination of the explosion, the unit folding sideways off the table. Both operators were down. The rear security man spun toward the explosion, his phone gone, his weapon coming up. He was looking at the defilade interior, not at the ridge crest. She was already moving, off the crest, down the interior slope in 3 fast strides, the second grenade in her hand. The 3 personnel at the northern entrance were turning, confused by the direction of the blast, their weapons oriented inward. She threw the second grenade toward the communications van's fuel tank and kept moving, low and fast, using the van's bulk as cover. The second explosion was larger. The fuel tank caught and the van became a bright, brief torch. She was behind the light truck when the Northern Watch team oriented on her position. She had the rifle up and fired twice in rapid succession. Suppressed, the shots nearly lost in the residual ringing of the explosions. 1 man down. The second dove behind the ridge wall. The third was running north, out of the defilade, into the open desert. She let him run. Rear security man was still up, working around the burning van toward her position. She could see his silhouette against the firelight. She fired once. He dropped. Silence except for the burning van. She did a quick scan. 5 personnel, 2 operators, the rear guard, and 2 of the 3 Northern Watch, down or out of the fight. 1 runner, north, putting distance between himself and the fire. She stepped to where the jamming rack had fallen. The housing was punctured in 3 places, the circuit boards visible through the holes, blackened and split. She brought her boot down on the antenna junction, once, twice, until the connector snapped. She keyed her radio on the long-range satellite frequency. Static. She waited 3 seconds. Static began to clear. Then faint but unmistakable, the satellite uplink tone. Carrier signal. The jamming system was dead. She was already transmitting. Any station, this is Sabre 2-1, emergency. Authentication follows. She ran through the authentication sequence. Al-Qaim airport is compromised. Elijah flight is targeted for approach. Abort Elijah approach. Repeat, abort Elijah. Threat is precision-guided rocket, ILS guided strike. Abort approach, acknowledge. She waited. 7 seconds. Then a voice, Israeli accented English, clipped and controlled. Sabre 2-1, this is Elijah flight coordination. Message received. Authentication confirmed. Elijah is holding at waypoint. Confirm threat disposition before approach authorization. Threat is not yet neutralized, Emily said. Hold at waypoint, I'll advise. Sabre 2-1, out. She lowered the radio. The fire from the van was dying down, the fuel burning off. Around her, the defilade was quiet and wrecked. The command node finished. But the Falcon was still out there. And now he knew the jamming was down. She felt it before she heard it. A shift in the air to her left. Something instinctive. The accumulated result of 10,000 hours of training that operated below conscious thought. She threw herself right. The round hit the light truck's door panel where her head had been. He was inside the defilade. She rolled behind the light truck's wheel well and stayed flat. The shot had come from the northern entrance of the defilade, from the direction the runner had gone. But the angle was wrong for someone standing at the entrance. The round had come from elevation. She looked up. The northern ridge wall of the defilade rose to about 4 meters at its highest point. In the firelight from the dying van, she could see the silhouette of the top edge, irregular, rock and compacted earth, the kind of natural parapet that a trained sniper would recognize immediately as a firing platform. He had come in from outside. He had heard the explosions, assessed the situation, and moved to the high ground above the defilade in the time it had taken her to destroy the jamming system and make her radio call. 40 seconds, at most. He had covered unknown ground in 40 seconds and found a firing position. She pressed her back against the wheel well and thought. He was above her, she was below him, behind cover, in a space approximately 30 meters wide. The burning van was between them. It was dying but still producing enough residual light to make the open ground dangerous. He had the elevation. She had the cover. A conventional sniper duel in this geometry was a losing proposition for her. She needed to change the geometry. She looked at the light truck. The engine was running. She had not registered this before, but the low idle was audible now that the other sounds had stopped. Keys in the ignition. The driver's window was down. She moved along the ground to the driver's door, kept the truck's body between herself and the ridgeline, reached up and found the gear lever by feel, manual transmission, already in neutral. She released the parking brake. The truck sat on a slight downslope toward the northern exit of the defilade. She pushed. The truck began to roll, slowly, gathering momentum on the slope, its headlights dark, moving silently except for the tire sound on the packed earth. She stayed with it, crouched at the rear panel, using the rolling truck as a moving shield, pushing it toward the northern exit. The Falcon fired at the truck, twice, fast, targeting what he expected to be the driver. The rounds punched through the cab. The truck cleared the defilade entrance. Emily broke left, into the open ground outside the defilade, low and fast, using the darkness beyond the firelight. She covered 20 meters before going prone behind a rock formation. She was now outside the defilade, on the same level as the ridge. The Falcon's position, the high point of the northern ridge wall, was to her right at approximately 70 meters. She had changed the geometry. She swept the thermal scope along the ridge top. She found him. He was pressed flat against the ridge crest, his outline barely readable in the thermal. Disciplined heat management, his body oriented parallel to the top edge, presenting the minimum possible profile. She could see the rifle barrel extending slightly beyond the rock edge, pointed down into the defilade where she was no longer located. He was searching for her. She had perhaps 5 seconds before he reoriented. 70 meters, clear air, no wind. He was slightly elevated, 8, maybe 10 degrees above her horizontal. She had one shot at this range before he saw her muzzle flash and moved. She adjusted the elevation, put the crosshair on the center of the thermal outline. She thought of the calibration shot at 0347, 2 inches from her scope. Not a kill shot, a message. He had chosen not to kill her when he could have. She thought of what that meant. She thought of what she needed from him. She shifted the crosshair left, to the rifle barrel extending beyond the rock edge. She fired. The round hit the rifle at the forend, the wood and metal junction just ahead of the action. The weapon was torn from his hands by the impact, spinning off the ridge into the defilade below. The Falcon did not move for a full second. Then he raised both hands, open, fingers spread, above the ridgeline. Emily did not lower her rifle. She stayed prone, the scope on the disarmed figure above the ridge, and keyed her radio with her left hand. Okafor, guidance packages, execute now. Copy, executing. She heard the distant thump of the shaped charge Okafor's team had prepared, the demolition solution for the guidance component crates. Then a second thump, smaller, then silence. Guidance packages are gone, Okafor reported. Hangar 3 is clear. Copy. Hold your positions. She looked at the figure on the ridge, both hands still raised. She had disarmed him, but he was not her prisoner yet. Getting from prone at 70 meters to close enough to secure him was a distance she would have to cross in open ground, alone, with no backup. She thought about it for 10 seconds. Then she called out, in English, clear and direct. Come down off the ridge, hands visible, slow. A pause, then movement. The figure rose from the ridge crest with the careful deliberateness of a professional. No sudden movements, no false starts. The behavior of someone who understood that the person holding the weapon was making decisions about his life and had decided to give her no reason to make the bad one. He descended the outer face of the ridge, moving toward her position. She kept the rifle on him. When he was 20 meters away, she said, "Stop." He stopped. In the faint starlight, she could see him clearly for the first time. Medium height, lean, mid-40s, with the deeply weathered face of someone who had spent 2 decades in harsh climate fieldwork. He wore no uniform markings. His eyes were dark and steady, and he looked at her with an expression that was neither fear nor defiance, but something that existed between them: assessment, professional curiosity. "The Falcon," she said. He said nothing. "Elijah is holding at waypoint," she said. "The jamming is down. The guidance packages are destroyed. The command node is finished." She held his gaze. "It's over." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the rifle she had fired from his hands, lying in the defilade below. "You could have taken that shot center mass," he said. His English was accented but precise. "From that position, at that range." "Yes," she said. "Why didn't you?" She kept the rifle on him. "Because I needed the operation stopped, not a body." He absorbed this. "The probe shot at 0347, he said. "I aimed 2 inches from your position." "I know. I calculated that you would move into a predictable fallback. You didn't." Something shifted in his expression. "You went through the terminal connector. I had not mapped that route." "No," Emily said. "You hadn't." He was quiet for a moment. In the distance, from the airport, she could hear voices. Okafor's team, the civilians beginning to stir. The night sky to the east had begun to lighten, almost imperceptibly, from black toward the very deep blue that preceded dawn. "Take a knee," she said. "Hands behind your head." He did it, clean and without hesitation. She keyed her radio. "Okafor, I need 2 personnel at the northern perimeter gate. I have a prisoner." "Copy. En route." She held her position, the rifle steady, and waited for Okafor's soldiers to arrive. The Falcon remained kneeling in the desert, his hands behind his head, looking at the horizon. Okafor's soldiers arrived at 0148. They took custody of the prisoner efficiently, and Emily followed at a distance as they moved back through the perimeter gate and into the airport grounds. The Falcon walked without resistance, without conversation, with the bearing of a man who had made a calculation and arrived at an outcome he was apparently prepared to accept. Emily was 50 meters behind the group when the shot came. It was not the Falcon's shot. He was secured, hands zip-tied, moving toward the maintenance workshop. The shot came from the western side of the airport, from inside the perimeter, from the direction of Hangar 3. She spun and dropped simultaneously, already scanning west. Old Wolf was on the ground near the hangar entrance. She ran. She reached him in 20 seconds. He was face down, and for one cold, terrible moment, she thought the worst. Then he moved, pushed himself up with his good arm, turned over, and she saw the wound. His left side, below the ribs. Entry visible. She couldn't assess exit without turning him, and she wasn't doing that on the tarmac. "The asset," Old Wolf said. His voice was compressed with pain but entirely lucid. "Rhodes took him down, but he got one shot off first." She had her hands on the wound, pressure applied, kit open beside her. "Don't talk." "I'll talk if I want," he said, and there was enough of his normal tone in it that the cold knot in her chest loosened fractionally. "It's not as bad as it looks. I've had worse." "You have not had worse." "Balkans, 94. Different wound, same general neighborhood. Bought me 3 weeks in a German hospital and the worst food of my life." Old Wolf. "I'm talking to stay conscious," he said quietly. "Let me talk." She kept the pressure on and looked up. Rhodes was standing over them, his face pale, his weapon still in his hand. "Asset is down," Rhodes said. "Engaged immediately after firing. I was half a second slow." "You were right there," Emily said. "Keep it together." She looked at Okafor, who had appeared beside her. "Get me a vehicle. Now, we need to move him." Okafor moved. "The jamming is down," Old Wolf said. "Elijah is holding." "Yes." "Guidance packages?" "Gone." "The Falcon?" "Okafor has him." He was quiet for a moment, processing. "You did all of that in—" "Don't." "I was going to say I'm proud of you," he said. She kept her hands on the wound and said nothing for a moment. The eastern horizon was definitely lighter now, the sky moving through deep blue toward gray. An hour to dawn, maybe less. "Don't make it past tense," she said finally. "Not past tense," he said. "I'm still here." "Then stay here." Okafor returned with a vehicle, one of the airport's ground service trucks, cleared of equipment, a flatbed that would serve as a makeshift litter transport. They moved Old Wolf onto it with care, Emily maintaining pressure throughout. She looked up at the sky as they moved him. Somewhere above the horizon, the Elijah aircraft was holding at waypoint, waiting for her word. She keyed the satellite radio. "Elijah flight coordination. This is Sabre 2-1. Threat is neutralized. Guidance system is destroyed. Counter-sniper element is secured. Airport is clear for approach at your discretion. Advise ETA." The response came in under 10 seconds. "Sabre 2-1, Elijah flight coordination. Confirming, we are inbound. ETA, your location, 22 minutes. "Copy," Emily said. "Runway is clear. We'll have lights." She turned to Okafor. "Get the runway lights on, whatever still works, and get those civilians moved back from the tarmac. I want the runway clear, and I want everyone in the hangars until the aircraft is on the ground." Okafor was already moving. Emily looked at Old Wolf on the truck bed. His color was not good, but his eyes were open and his breathing was steady. 22 minutes, she told him. "I'll be here in 22 minutes, he said. "You'd better be." The aircraft appeared at 0224. Emily saw the landing lights first, 2 white points descending out of the dark western sky, following the ILS beam down toward runway 27. She was standing on the tarmac 50 meters from the runway threshold, her rifle slung, watching the approach. The runway lights were on, half of them at least, the sections that still had functioning bulbs casting yellow pools across the cracked concrete. Okafor's team had marked the displaced threshold with vehicle headlights where the lights failed entirely. It wasn't a standard instrument approach lighting system. It was good enough. The aircraft broke below the overcast at 800 feet, a medium-range transport, unmarked except for a single small flag on the tail that Emily could not read in the dark. The approach was clean, the pilot following the ILS with precision, the aircraft stable and on centerline. It touched down at 0226. The landing roll was long. The runway surface was deteriorated and the pilot was being careful. When the aircraft finally turned off onto the taxiway, Emily exhaled a breath she felt like she'd been holding since 1940 hours. The aircraft stopped. The engine spun down to idle. The forward door opened. A man in civilian clothes descended the air stairs and moved toward Okafor with the brisk purposefulness of someone who had been told to move quickly and was taking the instructions seriously. They spoke briefly. Okafor pointed toward the hangars. The evacuation began. It was quiet and organized, the way these things were when the chaos had already happened, and what remained was the mechanics. Priority personnel first. Emily never learned who they were, and she didn't ask. Then families. Then the remaining civilian population in groups of 30, moving from the hangars across the tarmac to the aircraft in a steady stream. The children half asleep and held against their parents' shoulders, the old men walking slowly and with dignity. Emily stood at the edge of the tarmac and watched. 411 people. She counted. Not all of them fit on one aircraft. The transport took the most vulnerable first. The families with children, the elderly, the wounded from the terminal collapse. A second aircraft would follow in 4 hours for the remainder. Old Wolf had been stabilized in the maintenance workshop by the time the first aircraft landed. The Israeli Flight Coordination had arranged medevac priority. He would be on the second aircraft, bound for a trauma facility in Cyprus. Emily went to him at 0245 while the loading continued outside. He was lying on a field litter, an IV running, his color better than it had been on the tarmac. The pain medication had taken the edge off. She could see it in his face, the slight softening of the lines around his eyes. "Aircraft's down," she said. "I heard the engines. Civilians are loading. You're on the second flight. Cyprus?" "Cyprus." He nodded once. He looked at the ceiling of the maintenance workshop for a moment, at the old fluorescent fixtures, one of them still working, casting pale light over the space. "The Falcon," he said. "In custody. Israeli liaison personnel are taking him." She paused. "He cooperated. After he was secured, he gave us information on the full network, names, locations, the supply chain for the guidance packages." Old Wolf was quiet for a moment. He wanted to be taken. Emily had thought about this during the long walk back through the desert. "I think he was done," she said. "I think he'd been running operations for a long time and he was tired of it. The way he fought tonight, he was good, he was disciplined, but he wasn't trying to kill me, he was testing me. Like the probe shot at 0347. Like all of it." She looked at her hands. "He wanted to see if I was good enough to stop him. I think he needed someone to be." Old Wolf turned his head and looked at her. "And were you?" She thought about the tires shot at 200 meters, the grenade thrown in the dark, the shot that took the rifle instead of the man. "Tonight I was," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he reached out with his good hand and briefly pressed it against her forearm. Not a long gesture, not theatrical. The kind of acknowledgement that passed between people who had been through something together and had come out the other side still standing. "Get some rest," he said, "while you can." "After the second aircraft lifts," she said. "Of course," he said. "After the second aircraft lifts." She stood up and walked back out onto the tarmac. The official report was filed at 1400 hours, 3 days later. Emily read it in a borrowed office at the forward operating base 40 miles west, sitting across a desk from Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove, who had the practiced neutrality of a man who had learned to deliver institutional verdicts without inflection. The report classified the Al-Qaim airport engagement as a successful defensive operation protecting civilian non-combatants from an Iran-backed militia offensive. The guidance packages were listed as improvised rocket components seized and destroyed during the engagement. The Falcon's capture was noted in a classified annex that most people reading the main report would never see. Elijah was not mentioned anywhere. Emily read the report once through, set it on the desk, and looked at Hargrove. The airport battle prevented a precision strike on an Israeli evacuation aircraft, she said. That's not in here. That information is classified at a level above this document, Hargrove said. The civilian population was used as deliberate camouflage for a weapons pipeline operation. That's not in here either. That assessment is accurate, she said. Hargrove looked at her steadily. He was not an unkind man. He was a man working within structures that had their own logic, their own imperatives, their own reasons for preferring certain truths over others. Staff Sergeant Carter, he said, what you and your team accomplished at that airport will be fully documented in the classified record. The people who need to know. He paused. The people who don't need to know won't. Emily looked at the report on the desk. She thought of the families loading onto the aircraft in the dark, the children half asleep against their parents' shoulders, the elderly men walking slowly across the damaged tarmac with their bundles and their dignity. She thought of old Wolf in Cyprus, 3 surgeries in, and reportedly complaining about the food in terms that the nursing staff found creative. She thought of the Falcon, kneeling in the desert with his hands behind his head, looking at the horizon. She thought of the annotated approach plate, Elijah, 0300. The airport battle prevented a regional escalation, she said, not to Hargrove exactly, to the air in front of her. Yes, Hargrove said quietly, it did. She picked up the report, folded it once, and set it back on the desk. Is there anything else? She asked. No, he said. That's all. She stood up and walked out. 2 weeks later, a different country, a different climate, humid, green, the kind of air that felt heavy after the desert. Emily lay prone in a new position on a hillside above a road that an intelligence assessment said would be used by a weapons convoy in the next 48 to 96 hours. She had been in position since 0500. She was watching, learning, counting. Her radio crackled once. Old Wolf's voice, slightly rough still from the recovery, but present and clear. He was in Cyprus, 2 weeks post-surgery, already pushing the medical staff for a timeline on his return. How's the new position? He said. Humid, she said. I don't like humid. You don't like anything. I like clear air and good dope, she said. This is neither. You'll adapt. A pause. How's the target picture? Building. She swept the scope slowly. I've been here 6 hours and I've already found 3 things that don't fit. That's your instinct working. That's what you taught me. No, he said. I showed you the door. You walk through it yourself. A brief pause. Every battlefield has layers, kid. The headlines only show the surface. She thought of the official report sitting in a classified file in a building in Washington. The version that named the right outcome while quietly reorganizing the truth around it. She thought of 411 people who were somewhere safe now, in family homes, in temporary housing, in the slow and difficult work of reassembling lives after displacement. She thought of the children who would wake up tomorrow and not know that 2 weeks ago, on a broken runway in the northern desert, someone had stood between them and something irreversible. That was the surface. The layers were hers to carry. Copy that, she said. She settled her cheek against the stock, found her natural point of aim, and resumed watching the road below. The morning light came in low and flat through the trees. Somewhere behind her, a bird called once in the humid green air, then went silent. She was still. She was watching. She was waiting. Fade out.